The Founder of Demonic Cultivation. An English translation by Vang 33. Read by Luna Minerva. Chapter 11. Elegance, Part 2. The scar stole away all of Wei Wuxian's concentration, and he wondered if he was hallucinating. Breathing in strained and irregular gulps, he was too mesmerized to spare the man's face a single glance. Suddenly, the scene in front of his eyes turned pure white, as though a snowy curtain had dropped before his face. The curtains parted shortly after, and the tip of a blue blade snapped toward him, accompanied by icy wind. Lan Wangji's sword, Wei Chen, was famed for its martial prowess. Oh no, it was Lan Wangji! Ducking and running from swinging blades was, fortunately, familiar territory for Wei Wuxian. Rolling away immediately, he very narrowly dodged the first attack, and while fleeing the cold springs, he even had some time to peel off the blade of grass that had gotten stuck to his hair. Like a headless housefly, however, he immediately ran straight into a group on nightly patrol. They seized him and began to admonish him. "Why are you racing around everywhere? Running is prohibited inside the cloud recesses." Upon discovering the patrolmen were Lan Wangji and the others, Wei Wuxian was overjoyed. Now someone would finally brandish a stick at him and chase him out and down the mountain. Immediately he presented himself. I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything at all. I'm definitely not here to see Lan Wangji bathe. Immediately, the juniors were struck dumb by Wei Wuxian's audacity. Everywhere, Lan Wangji was as revered as the high, holy mountains. He was a personage whose name could not be profaned, and the younger disciples of his own clan venerated him like a god. To hide near the cold springs to spy on him bathing, even the thought of such a thing was a reprehensible, unforgivable crime. Lan Wangji was so frightened, his voice had changed. What? Lan Wangji? Lan Wangji is there? Furiously, Lan Wangji yanked Wei Wuxian over. "You gay bastard! You'd spy on him too?" Wei Wuxian sealed his criminal reputation while the iron was hot. But I didn't get a single glimpse of Lan Wangji without his clothes on." Lan Wangji sputtered angrily. "You're like someone who hides silver in his backyard and then puts up a sign saying, 'No silver here.' You're still saying you didn't do it. Well, if you didn't do it, then why are you sneaking around like some sort of perverted ghost? Look at yourself. You're too ashamed to even show your face." Wei Wuxian had indeed covered his face with both of his hands. Do you have to be so loud? Making a racket is prohibited inside the cloud recesses." Just as they began flapping at each other like confused dogs and headless chickens, Lavangji emerged from the thick bed of orchid plants, his long hair loose and white robes draped over his body. Within the space of a few seconds, he was already dressed perfectly neatly, Wei Chen still unsheathed. All of the juniors rushed to greet him politely, and Lan Wangji began blabbering rapidly. "Lan Wangji, this Mo Shen Yu is just repulsive. You only brought him back because he helped us out at Mo Manor, but he... Wei Wuxian thought this time his actions must be beyond anything Lan Wangji could bear. Surely now he'd be swiftly kicked out of the mountain gate. But in fact, Lan Wangji did nothing more than briefly sweep his eyes over the offender. Silent for a moment, he sheathed Wei Chen with a shing and said, "Everyone, go." The 3 syllables were uttered calmly and lightly, yet were powerful enough to preempt any objection, causing everyone to disperse forthwith. Nonchalantly, Lan Wangji grabbed and lifted Wei Wuxian by the back collar and lugged him towards the silence room. In Wei Wuxian's past life, he and Lan Wangji had been roughly the same height and were both slender and unusually tall. Wei Wuxian had only been a tiny bit shorter than Lan Wangji. When they stood next to each other, there was barely a centimeter's difference. But after awakening to a new life and a new body, he was a full 7 centimeters or so shorter than his old acquaintance. Though ordinary people would still consider him tall and slim, while Lan Wangji dangled him over the ground, he was completely unable to put up a fight. He struggled, stumbled, and was on the verge of shouting, but Lavangji said coldly,
Those who make an uproar will be silenced.
Though Wei Wuxian had tried and failed to get thrown off the mountain, he had to decline being silenced, thank you very much. No matter how he thought about it, he was unable to comprehend what was happening. Since when did the Lan clan have so much tolerance for an utterly shameless delinquent who spied on such a distinguished member of their family bathing? When Lavangji hauled Wei Wuxian inside, he made a beeline for the inner chamber and threw said delinquent onto his bed. Wei Wuxian thudded as he landed and let out a cry of pain. Unable to right himself at first, it was a while before he finally managed to struggle into a sitting position. Contemplating feigning coquettish anger to unsettle the man, he lifted his head and glanced at him. Towering over his head, Lan Wangji held Wei Shen in one hand, gazing imperiously down upon him. Wei Wuxian was accustomed to seeing Second Master Lan with his forehead ribbon and hair tied neatly, meticulous in every detail, not a single thread out of place. The sight of his raven hair slightly disheveled, and his frame wrapped only in a thin garment was entirely foreign, and he couldn't help but slightly stare. Moreover, after the dragon and floundering and staggering, Lan Wangji's originally tightly closed collar had been pulled open, and a well-defined collarbone peeked through the gap, as did the crimson brand beneath it. Once more, the moment Wei Wuxian's eyes fell upon the scar, his attention was hostage to it. Before he had become the yearling Lao Zu, his own body had also borne such a scar. What's more, Lan Wangji's was, in both location and shape, exactly the same. Wei Wuxian couldn't help but find the mark familiar, but strange. And speaking of strange, the 30 or more whip scars on Lan Wangji's back were also strange. Second Master Lan had made his name at a young age. Everyone heaped high praise upon him, and he was widely known as the most orthodox and punctilious of cultivators. He was one of the twin jades, the pride of the Guosu Lan clan, and older generations all viewed his every word and action as the standard of excellence for all of their disciples. What unforgivable thing could he have possibly done to be subject to such brutal punishment? To have 30 or more whip scars, he must have been beaten within a hair of death. Once the injuries were inflicted on his body, the scars would stay his entire lifetime, so he never forgot, and would never commit such a crime ever again. Following Wei Wuxian's line of sight, Lan Wangji lowered his gaze almost imperceptibly when he pulled his collar shut, covering his collarbone and hiding his scar, thus transforming into the frosty Han Wongjun once more. Just then, the heavy toll of the clock echoed into the room from the outside. The Lan clan's rules were rigid and exacting, and their schedule of work and rest extremely strict. They went to sleep at exactly 9 at night and rose at exactly 5 the next morning, supervised by the bells ringing. Listening to the clock with rapt attention, Lavangji said to Wei Wuxian, "You will sleep here." Without leaving him any chance to reply, he turned and crossed into the other partition of the silence room, leaving Wei Wuxian lying crookedly on the bed, deeply bewildered. It wasn't as though he hadn't suspected Lan Wangji had guessed his true identity, but the problem was that it made no sense from the perspective of logic or feeling. Since bodily sacrifice was a forbidden technique, by necessity very few people knew of it, and because only pieces of the instructions had survived, there was no way to actually use it. This had been the case for a long time, and thus even the number of people who believed in the idea had dwindled. It was a mystery exactly how Mo Xuanyu had gotten hold of a copy of the secret scroll detailing the procedures for casting the spell, without which he couldn't have summoned Wei Wuxian. In any case, Lan Wangji could hardly have concluded that the person in Mo Xuanyu's body was him, purely based on some bad flute playing. Even after searching his soul, Wei Wuxian didn't think he and Lan Wangji's friendship in his previous life had been anything like the kinds of relationships which were engraved in hearts and carved into bones. They had been students together, faced danger together, and fought side by side, but these moments had been like falling petals or running water, quick to come and quick to go. Lan Wangji was a disciple of the Guosu Lan sect, which fated him for a life of refinement and propriety, incompatible with Wei Wuxian's natural temperament. Though he couldn't call their relationship poor, he couldn't with a straight face say it was good either. Lan Wangji's opinion of him was probably the same as others. He probably thought that the virtue in Wei Wuxian's spirit was lacking, whereas the evil in it ran rampant, and one day it had inevitably come back to haunt him. After Wei Wuxian had defected from the Yunmengjiang sect and become the yearling Lao Zuo, more than a little bad blood had developed between him and the Guosulan sect, especially in the few months prior to his death. If Lan Wangji had definitely identified him as Wei Wuxian, the sect should already have beaten him until both the ground beneath his feet and the sky above his head turned black. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Once upon a time, Lan Wangji had been unable to tolerate anything he did, however small. But now, no matter how demonically or monstrously he behaved, Lan Wangji tolerated it all. Should Second Master Lan be congratulated for his rapid progress? Wei Wuxian stared helplessly at empty space for a long time before rolling off the bed and sneaking very quietly into the other partition. Lan Wangji lay on his side atop a second bed, apparently already sunken into a deep sleep. Without breathing or making a single noise, Wei Wuxian approached him. His heart still beating with determination, he prepared to pat down Lan Wangji to see whether he could feel out that elusive jade token. But as soon as he reached out his hand, Lan Wangji's long lashes trembled, and his eyes opened. Wei Wuxian steeled his heart and flung himself onto the bed. Lan Wangji hated being touched by other people, Wei Wuxian remembered. Before, if someone touched him, they were liable to be sent flying, so if the man still tolerated Wei Wuxian's behavior, then he couldn't possibly be Lan Wangji. The Yiling Lao Zuo could only suspect it was his friend's body which had been stolen. Wei Wuxian's entire frame was atop Lan Wangji's, his legs spread, kneeling on either side of the man's waist. He propped up his torso with his hands, trapping his old acquaintance between his arms, and slowly lowered his head. The two faces grew closer and closer, closer and closer, to the point where he began to have difficulties breathing. Then Lan Wangji finally opened his mouth. After a period of heavy silence, he said, "Off." Summoning the thickest skin he possessed, Wei Wuxian said, "No." A pair of light, pale eyes, almost within his reach, met his gaze. Lan Wangji stared fixedly at him and repeated, "Off." "No. When you let me sleep here, you should have realized this would happen," Wei Wuxian said.
Are you certain you want to do things this way?
Lan Wangji said. Wei Wuxian didn't know why, but he had a feeling he needed to consider his next reply carefully. As soon as he was about to lift the corner of his lip, his waist suddenly went numb and his legs grew weak. Soon after, his entire body collapsed on top of Lan Wangji. The half-formed smile now frozen on his lips, his head laying against the man's chest, he realized he was paralyzed from head to toe. Lan Wangji's voice resonated from above. His voice was low and heavy, and his chest rumbled faintly with every syllable he uttered.
Then perhaps you should spend the entire night this way.
Wei Wuxian hadn't had an inkling that this would be the outcome of his antics. He struggled and tried to sit up, but his waist continued to be sore and weak. Thus, he had no choice but to stay in this embarrassing position, lying right on top of the other man's hard body, struck stupid by the whole situation. What had happened to Lan Wangji over the years? How did he turn out like this? Was this really the same Lan Wangji? The one who had had his body stolen could only be Han Wangjun, right? Just as waves of shock and terror were crashing over Wei Wuxian's heart, the man in question suddenly raised his torso lightly. Wei Wuxian roused himself, thinking Lan Wangji had finally reached the limit of his endurance, but he did nothing more than gently wave his hand. The light went out.